Welcome to another edition of Uvaga Uvaga, brought to you by EFC United. We are coming to you once again from our studios at the museum. Today we will discuss the second country that will not make it into the World Cup in 2026.
The Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, will not make it to the World Cup in 2026.
Stick around and I will tell you why. It is a long and complicated story. Great talent was lured away in the 1950s and 1960s. These talented individuals went to Western European countries where their kids were able to get the resources they needed to succeed as footballers. In addition, numerous talented players who were born in the 90s and the early 2000s have left the DRC to play overseas. This phenomenon drains talent away from the domestic league. The domestic league is underinvested, like many industries in the DRC, and is unable to fully develop young players, attract prime players, and retain high-impact players. By having underdeveloped infrastructure, from roads to high-level training facilities to micro and macro manufacturing and processing plants, the growth potential of the country is severely limited. High-yield investments in strategic areas that funnel resources back to critical areas of the economy and not to the pockets of a few elites and foreign corporations are what is needed to achieve sustainable long-term growth that will develop, retain, and attract talent to the DRC. As it stands now, revenues from unprocessed cobalt, copper, and diamonds, or footballers, are leaving the country in droves. In addition, you have an underdeveloped energy sector that is incapable of growing a national economy. What is left is an underperforming private sector, an underperforming public sector, and an underperforming agricultural sector, and ultimately a swath of underperforming people. What makes the situation so disparate is the potential of the country. Case in point, according to the UN, the DRC has a river system that could provide hydroelectric power to the entire continent of Africa. Proper investment in the infrastructure and major institutions of a country can then be followed by investment in sports programs. When we use the small arms, two hands ratio, we find a positive correlation between youth and young adult participation in violent crime and the number of small arms prevalent in the country. Although it is difficult to measure the exact number of small arms in a country, as many end up in the general population illegally, we can extrapolate and get a decent estimate of the true number. One thing we usually find is that with the absence of small arms, especially illegal small arms, you tend to have more youth and young adults participating in sports. Young men all over the globe learn to fight at an early age. More often than not, it is play fighting. Young boys play fight and learn how to develop strategy and their competitive edge. But, as is often the case in areas where there are high levels of poverty, limited resources, and few opportunities, fighting becomes more violent and often becomes deadly. When the flames are fanned by small or even large groups vying for power, the violence becomes even more pronounced. Furthermore, potentially productive young men permanently develop the mentality of a thug or a gangster and become marginal societal dropouts. Boys will be boys. They will compete. They will compete for resources and they will compete for survival because they are wired to compete. Polo became a sport because members of the cavalry needed something constructive to do after the war. They put down their guns and picked up a mallet to show their skill and prowess riding horseback. Alternatively, some members of the cavalry kept their guns, donned white robes and hoods, and terrorized a large segment of the southern United States after the American Civil War. By giving young men something productive to do, by giving them parameters by which they can compete in, be it in academia, the boardroom, or a football pitch, with proper instruction, society can assemble a highly productive community. Proper investment builds societies and communities. Proper investment builds individuals. If you want to compete at the highest levels, you must invest wisely. For the DRC, it is not a coaching problem, a lackluster defense, or the inability to put the ball in the back of the onion sack. It is a lack of investment in the country, the infrastructure, and most importantly, a lack of investment in the people. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Uvaga Uvaga.